The cloud sucks, and here's why. And I'm not talking about like normal virtual machines or dedicated machines. I'm talking about fancy cloud stuff like Lambdas, S3, and all these dingle-dangle. If you're just running on a normal virtual machine or a dedicated machine that's running Linux or FreeBSD, if you're this kind of sick puppy, then it's a different deal. It's not really like the same way. Like what I'm talking about here is fancy cloud infrastructure. Number one is that there's a lot of points of failure when you're using the cloud. Now, if you're using the cloud and you have like 5 different services, that means that 5 different servers can break. And that means that your software is usually less stable. Now, of course, you can say that maybe they have high uptime, etc. But there's like 2 problems with it. One is that they can break down, or 2, you can break down with the communication between. It's very complex to set up things and making sure things are working compared to just having a normal server. Number 2 is the high cost. And here we're not only talking about the high cost for the hardware, but also for the programming. And a lot of people will say that the cloud infrastructure can save you a lot of money. And usually that's not the case. And the reason why is if you, let's say you're just something very simple, that you're using S3 instead of just uploading it to your server. Now, almost all libraries and common frameworks have been made so that it's very easy just to take a file, save it on the hard drive, and then serve it. Now, if you don't do that, then you have to make sure to upload it to, for example, S3. S3 it's saved in. Now if you need to do some manipulations on it, now you need to use Lambda, etc, etc. It's a lot of development time where usually it's just opening a file. And you don't often need that scalability. And if you do need like some more data output, you can just put a CDN up in front, like Bunny CDN or something like that, which is very cheap and very fast. Now, this is another service. I normally don't put that on unless it's a necessity. But this is just the thinking there behind. And if you're using something like Lambda or S3, you usually pay 10 to 100 times the cost of just having it on hardware. You might say, well, I have high peak, but is it like 10 or 100 times peak than just buying a normal computer? So just get a single computer. The third one is login. Now, when you use a cloud infrastructure, it's usually very unique and it's made this way so that it's very hard to switch. Nowadays, Kubernetes makes sometimes it a little bit easier, but in general, it's just made so that you're locked in and you can't switch. And this way, when the prices of the hardware fall, then it doesn't fall for you. This was very common with Heroku, which was a beautiful way to host your software, but it unfortunately just became very not competitive, and it's not really useful anymore if you have just a medium-sized business. The number 4 is it's easier to set up a dev environment. If you have no fancy cloud infrastructure or no fancy things, you just run your app. Maybe you run it in Docker, but even sometimes you can just run it without Docker. You just run it on your local computer. You don't have any fancy databases you need to set up or anything like that. It just runs. It's very easy, and you don't have to think about it. It's the same with the staging environment, that the staging environment can be just set up and you don't have to duplicate all of your fancy cloud stuff and get it all running for different staging environments. And staging environments are one of the most important things to make sure that you test your software before it goes live, and is one of the hardest things to actually make really well. If you just have a computer that's running and that's it, then it's very simple. Like for example, for us, what we do is we have the staging environment is usually just sending emails with Telegram instead of Mailgun. Then that's the only thing we have change of difference. Everything is basically the same. Number 6 is that it's easier to test. If you don't have a lot of cloud infrastructure, it's very easy to test. Like let's say you test API to upload a file. If you're using S3, it's going to be very hard to test that. You have to communicate with it, you have to delete it, you have to make sure all of these things are working in the right order, you have to fake some HTML calls, etc. It's going to be really, really annoying. Or like, not HTML, like API calls that return HTML, etc. Like, it's really annoying. It's not easy to test. If you just upload a file to a hard drive with that they're running Python or Node or whatever, it's very easy to check that, hey, this file was there and it's correct. There's no more like fancy things you need to do with that. And number 7, which is probably the most important thing, is that when you learn to use a Linux environment or a FreeBSD if you're this kind of sick puppy, then what happens is that you are not learning a tool, you're learning the principles. And a single machine nowadays can scale you up to many thousands or even hundreds of thousands of users. So usually you don't need the scalability that comes from all these fancy infrastructure. You actually learn the mechanics that are happening. You're learning and running it on the bare metal. And it takes some time to learn, but it's learning that will be there for life. I don't know if Docker will be here that well in 5-10 years. Kubernetes, I have no idea. Maybe it's going to be very popular still. But everything is just changing all the time. And so you might have learned one tool and learned it very well, but now it's depreciated, something else is used. And it's not like that with Linux. It's not like that with FreeBSD. They're going to continue to be around for the next 30 years. And of course, when there's a good cloud infrastructure you can use, you just use that single little thing and you don't worry about all the other things. Just use what is needed. Okay, I have some problems with scalability. I'm going to use this one thing here just to improve whatever I need to. Sometimes we put a CDN up in front because that's just a lot faster, and we put our own CDN with Bunny CDN or something like that up. But usually we just avoid it if we can. Why have it if it's not needed? I hope you like this here, and I will tell a little bit more about what we do instead to avoid this fancy cloud infrastructure and spending like hundreds of hours trying to learn this weird stuff that doesn't really actually contribute any value to your business or my business. And I will tell you about this in the next video, so maybe hit that subscribe and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.